Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Regardless of where you're joining us from around the world, we appreciate you taking a few minutes of your time this evening and stopping by mine and Ridge Armory to see what we've got to say. So, my name is Toby Gross. I am the owner of a small security consultation service and firearms training business called Mining Ridge Armory, or named Mining Ridge Armory. And I wanted to do a little webinar tonight about Church Security 101. So what I'm going to do is, I've started the live broadcast here on YouTube. I'm going to give it a few minutes and let people join. The way YouTube works and the way all the algorithms work is you have to give them a minute to let everybody see that the broadcast has begun and that everything's going on. And then we'll see if we get enough people to join, and then we'll jump right into the content after that. So the way that this will work is, for those of you who have never seen a direct webinar on YouTube, is those of you out there in the viewer land are a few seconds behind me. So anytime you comment, for starters, I don't know you're out there. I see a count of how many people are out there, but I don't know who you are unless you say hello or let me know your name or let me just wave or say something just to let us know you're there. But beyond that, you're a couple seconds behind me, so forgive me if it takes me just a minute to be able to reply and see your response and then get back to you in real time. Forgive me. Obviously, if you're watching this in replay, thank you. We appreciate you taking your time to come by and review this content after the fact. And, just like we're leaving a comment live over here to the side while you're here with me, you can also leave a comment below, and I will do my best to get back to you in a timely fashion. So, again, just say hello and say, just let us know you're out there. Ask any questions you can, and I will do my best to answer them or get you to someone who can. So, all that said, I'm going to go ahead and start trying to pull up some content here and get us going over on the second screen. I have a PowerPoint for tonight, but this isn't going to be one of those PowerPoints of death where I just sit here and go straight through a bunch of bullet points on the PowerPoint. This one is going to be more just me having a couple things for you to be able to look through while I'm talking. It's just a couple things for you to be able to look through and see, as well as just things to help me remember what's going on. Hey, Midnight Range TM, welcome back. Appreciate you stopping by to see tonight's show. So tonight's show is about Church Security 101. So Mining Ridge Armory, here at Mining Ridge Armory, we've been doing a few webinar series over the past couple of weeks with everybody stuck at home with the coronavirus. We felt like it would actually help to get some of that information out there, particularly in light of all the new shooters that we've got going on, the security and the kind of some of the craziness that's going on. And so, we wanted to help out in any way we could. And unfortunately, my business isn't exactly considered critical or essential. So I felt like the way that I could help is to share information and knowledge from a security perspective, both information security and physical security, with those of you out there who could actually use that information in passing along, secondary and protecting those around you or in your day job, in your daily lives, passing along, secondary and protect. So we are going to be talking, hang on one second. That's pretty good comment about the creme brulee there. That's pretty funny. So, so all that said, I'm going to jump into some basic introductions, and then we'll jump straight into the content. So, without further ado, Again, I had mentioned just a minute ago, my name is Toby Gross. I'm the owner of a small firearms. And for those of you midnight, you've definitely heard this spiel before, and so I apologize for you. But I got to go through my "Who am I and why do you care to listen to me, or do you care to listen to me?" speech for those people who may be watching this in replay, or for those who may not have came or have heard me any of my webinars before. So, who am I and why do you care? My name is Toby Gross. I am the owner of a small security consultation service and firearms training business called Ridge Armory. Yep, got to be serious now, midnight. That's right. Game face is on. Um, from an information security perspective, I've been doing computer work and information technology and information security now for grand total over 30 years. Started when I was 14 with basic computer programming and typing and things like that, and haven't stopped working in computers ever since. Most recently, as far as a day job goes, I've been working in the information security realm as a project and process management for a Fortune 40 company, managing managing projects to oversee and assure, some of the identity and access management. I've spent a great deal of time, as you can see from the certifications there on the screen. I won't go into extreme detail, but I've spent a great deal of time, education, formalized training in security, computer, network, and technology securities, both in the actual screw turning realms, such as the A+, into network and security concepts, like as in the case of the Network Plus and Security Plus. Also have significant amounts of formalized training in forensic data recovery, and just pretty much kind of a pretty good breadth of knowledge when it comes to information security. I'm by no means certified or by no means an expert in anything, and I didn't stay at the Howard Johnson last night either. But I do have a pretty good breadth of understanding of a lot of different areas in the technology realm, including surveillance technologies, closed circuit television, applications and systems, as well as IP-based security systems, smart home automation systems, those kinds of things. I've actually served a couple of years as a beta tester for smart home. Excuse me, smart home design business. So where I'm going with that is from an information security perspective and from a computer and technology perspective. I've got a pretty good base of knowledge on what to do to protect your site and your individual users or your individual congregation members when it comes to computer use and just general infrastructure and topology security. From a physical security perspective, obviously I'm just like anyone else. I've, in the South, I've spent my entire life, in and around firearms. After about 2009, I started getting actual formalized training and committed to taking at least 2 formalized training courses per year. As well as getting official actual certifications in instructing and then being able to pass along that knowledge to other people. So started out with, at this point I've obtained my NRA training counselor status, which is basically a trainer of trainers in almost every discipline that NRA offers, almost. And then of course, I've also worked with the North Carolina Department of Criminal Justice Standards Division, Department of Justice, and have become a certified firearms concealed instructor for my state, wildlife, hunter safety education. I hold a small FFL. And then, of course, I'm constantly taking more advanced classes like CQB tactics, two-man vehicle tactics, defensive tactics, long-range, high-threat protection, things like that. But more importantly than all of that, from a church perspective, obviously firearms and overt versus covert security details are something we're going to talk about, and that's great and that's very important. But in addition to all of that, I've also focused a great deal of training and certification on the mental and legal aspects of being able to utilize force in different scenarios. So, for example, you can see from my qualifications there that I've taken some of the Masad Ayub training as well as some of the situational awareness training, and I'm actually a certified instructor for the situational awareness program by Emergence Disrupt through Yusuf Badu. I may refuse to be a victim training counselor for the NRA, which is also a non-firearms related, more of a mental and a comprehensive, all-inclusive, just security methodology training course that takes a few hours, about 4 hours. Covers a lot of things, anywhere from elder abuse to child abuse to internet security best practices, physical layered security best practices, those kinds of things. So my point in saying all this is from an information technology and information security and a physical security perspective, both hard and soft skills, hard skills of being, knowing how to use the techniques and tactics around most firearms systems, all the way to the mental and legal and, layered security approach. Got a lot of training and a lot of background and a lot of credentials. So no, I am not even close to an expert, and I don't even know one millionth of everything that I would like to know. But would like to share any knowledge that I do have with those of you out there who are watching, or those of you who could benefit from this information for your particular church. Now, I know a lot of you may be thinking, well, that's great, awesome, but my church doesn't. My church never has any kind of incidents. My church never has anything go wrong. We got a couple of cops who are off duty, law enforcement officers who are off duty, and they're always concealed carrying. So I think we're good. I think we're solid. Well, I pray and hope that you are right. But that's not the only thing we're going to talk about tonight. We're not just talking about covert and overt, hard skill, physical, or firearms armed security professionals. We're going to be talking about the overall comprehensive and entire encapsulated picture of a layered security concept for your particular church. And by the way, this doesn't have to be a church. It can be a synagogue, a mosque, any type of religious organization whatsoever. I just titled the presentation Church Security 101 just because it seemed like it was a little bit easier. And I want to start by giving you an example of something that made a huge impact in my life and actually changed the course of the way that I viewed religion, I viewed security, I viewed adults, I viewed everything. When I was a child, I was attending a service at my local church. I was raised very staunch Southern Baptist. You didn't dance. You wore the skirts down to your ankles. And that kind of thing. A very, very staunch and strict and rigid Southern Baptist upbringing. Initially, up until I got into my teenage years, and there was one evening I remember in particular that I was at church, and I was sitting there, and it's actually a really good sermon. The preacher was really into it. Everybody in the audience was really into it. It was a real positive, good feel. It was an amazing vibe. Everything was just going really well. So much so that I was actually contemplating, going up to the altar during the altar call. As those of you who are in the Baptist realm know that there's generally an altar call at the end of a lot of services. For those of you who are not, what altar call is basically where they'll say, anyone who hasn't accepted, Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior or whatever, please come up here and we'll pray for you, and we'll talk to you for a few minutes and that kind of thing. That's pretty much all there is to it. You just come up and kneel at the altar, and you bare your heart to one of the deacons or to the pastor, to the preacher, and then they pray, and you go on with your life. So this particular one, like I said, several people started piling up to the altar, and which was awesome. I was even contemplating walking out in the aisle and running up myself. Next thing you know, I noticed that there was one guy who was kneeling up there, and he was acting weird. He was kind of twitchy and tense, and he was kind of making unusual movements, but he was there, and he was kneeling, and he was doing what he was supposed to do. One of the deacons walked up to him from beside and, just knelt down beside him. It was very touching, a very, very beautiful scene. Put his hand on his shoulder, he just knelt down and was whispering in his ear. You could see he closed his eyes, and he was just really getting into it. He wasn't there but a couple of seconds, this deacon who had knelt down. And immediately, the guy who was already at the altar and who was kneeling for the altar call whipped his head and looked at the guy just with a dead serious, cancerous look in his eye. And the next thing I knew, he took one or two steps back to arm's distance and punched the deacon in the face. Just nailed him. And Everyone in the congregation immediately began to scream and to become, disheveled and disjointed. Nobody knew what to do. Many people froze and didn't know how to react. A couple of the deacons, um, again, who were around the altar and ready to speak, just kind of froze up and stood off to the side, didn't know what to do. You know, guys started coming in for round two, was actually, and this deacon was just backing off and was not engaging, which is the right answer. It's what he should have done. Finally, a couple of the guys came to their wits, stepped up, and tried to get in between them and break all this up. They escorted the gentleman who was, combative out the side door. The deacon then followed to go out the side door as well. You could hear, loud voices from outside and that kind of thing. There was a commotion. So that made an indelible impression on me. All right. That incident changed the way that I viewed religion. It changed the way that I viewed security. It changed everything. And that was in a small church. And that was just one example of the literally hundreds of thousands of examples you could come up with of things that could potentially happen in your congregation that aren't necessarily an active shooter or aren't necessarily, a drunk stumbling in the front door or anything like that. Major things don't always have to happen in order for you to have a plan and an SOP in place to deal with them. This particular incident, there had been pre event indicators. This particular parishioner had displayed definitive signs leading up to this incident that if someone had been paying attention and there had been proper SOPs in place at the church, they could probably very likely could have avoided this incident altogether and entirely. In later interviews with that particular combative parishioner, it was revealed that he told, he flat out said, God told me to come to church that day. God told me to punch him in the face. And later on, unfortunately, uh, tragically, that particular parishioner also ended up taking his own life. Again, were there pre-event indicators? Were there things that the congregation could have done? Were there ways, things that you could have had in place as SOPs? Were there procedures and things you could have done to see this coming and then to do something about it ahead of time? We're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about some of those pre-event indicators and some of the things that you as a church and you as a congregation need to do. Again, circling back to the concept of the fact that from a physical security perspective, the bottom line is there are literally thousands of different things that your church has to deal with. Anything from actual violent acts to natural disasters that we're going to talk about. So just since 1999 to 2017, there have been 1,617 deadly force incidents. You can see the statistics here, and this is in churches, by the way. This isn't just in general. This is in congregations or in churches or religious organizations. There have been 203 domestic violence overflows into church, 323 that were robbery related, whether it was breaking and entering or just internal stealing, 169 personal conflicts with two or more people from different households, 141 mental illness, 42 drug related, 75 biased against specific type of religion, 112 gang related, 187 categorized as random. And I want you to note these statistics only involve deadly force incidents, okay? Not vandalism, robberies, natural disasters, medical or other negative events. So let that sink in for a second, okay? From 1999 to 2017, there have been this many numbers of deadly force incidents in churches, okay? In congregations. Again, doesn't talk about robbery, vandalism, so on and so forth. These are just robbery related, personal conflicts, et cetera, et cetera. Of those incidents, 275 had weapons involved: gun, knife, automobile, explosives, poison, hanging, beating, et cetera, et cetera. 945 firearms, 260 stabbing, 97 automobiles, 90 fire explosives. All right. So not just from a physical security perspective, but let's talk about information security. So when you're talking about your congregation, in this day and age, it's a holistic way of looking at it. Let me stop for just 1 second and read some of these comments here, because definitely midnight range, that is for sure. It is very hard to guard every time. They want to help them, and they tend to overlook the fact that sometimes you just can't help them, and sometimes the best way to help them is to identify things ahead of time. They do go things definitely go sideways. That is exactly right. So in this day and age, another few things you have to think about is from the information security perspective, not just physical security. So, one resource stated that worldwide grand total, and this is all businesses, this isn't just churches, this is all businesses, but it applies from a business perspective to your congregation and to your individual small business owners, large business owners, and congregation members. That, there's been $133.7 billion spent worldwide. Okay, these are statistics from 2019. There's been, as of 2019, in the first half of 2019 only, there were 4.1 billion records that were breached and exposed out to malicious actors. 71% of those breaches were financially motivated, where they're trying to steal, money from your congregation, money from your parishioners, money from your small businesses, and or were motivated 25% were motivated by espionage. So state sponsored is becoming a really big thing. You have countries, really small countries, who have more lenient laws than we do here in the United States. And they'll have people who come in and literally work a shift. Like they'll come in, 8 to 5, and they work a shift trying to hack you and scam you and make money off of you and get you we're the IRS calling and we just need you to let us log into your computer or whatever the case may be. You have people who are getting paid to do that. And again, I'm not going to step through all of these, but you can look at some of this and understand the concept that passwords, breaches, data security is becoming more and more and more of vulnerability on many different levels with regards to your congregation. So you've got the hard security of actual physical acts of violence and deadly threats and or negative events that occur inside of your church, to the information security perspectives that need to be protected and attended to. And again, I won't step through all of these. Pause for a second on some words here or some typing. That is correct. So we're going to talk about gut feelings a little bit here tonight, and we're going to talk about a book at the end of this by Gavin DeBecker called The Gift of Fear, Surviving Signals That Protect Us. We're going to talk about that here a little later when we get into some of the resources that at the very end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a bunch of free resources. Well, not free, I'm sorry, free information that you can use, some of it free, absolutely free, some of it, very minimal cost that you can use when you walk away from this seminar or webinar tonight and use to help you to stand up your congregation's security in depth, with or without me. So that's going to be one of the ones we're going to talk about. Always trust your gut. He's right. All right. So I want to be perfectly, perfectly, perfectly clear. If something happens in your congregation and you're on the security team, hey, gun loving grandpa, how are you? Welcome. Thanks for coming by. If something happens in your congregation and you're on the security team, or you're on the deacon board, or you're the pastor, it is your fault. Period. I am not going to sugarcoat this. I'm not going to coddle you. Now, we all understand the concept that, um, yeah, Buck's here now. Things are going to get real. We all understand the concept that if you want a firearm, the firearm isn't what commits the evil act. The person behind the firearm is. I get that. And we can all agree upon that for sure. However, according to the Bible's wise advice at Zechariah 9:8, I will encamp at my temple to guard it against marauding forces. Never again will an oppressor overrun my people, for now I am keeping watch. So I want to be abundantly clear that it is your job as the shepherds of the flock, whether it be in the deacon board, the security team, or the pastoral team, to make sure that your church is protected at every possible level that you can protect it at, because that flock that is in your care it's in your care. And I also want to point out real quick, just as a side note, this is not even anywhere close to a new concept. Even in colonial America, it was written into law, people, law, not just, hey, this is a good idea. Glad this is having some meaning for you, Midnight. Glad you're getting some benefit from it. It was written into law, literally, that if you were going to church and you were having a meeting of the congregation, then your local militia or your local forces, who basically had the skills, capability, and mentality to protect those in the flock, by law had to, okay, under fine and under penalty of money. They were going to get charged if they didn't, right? So this isn't a new concept. You, as the shepherds of your flock, need to be taking this stuff seriously, and you need to take it as your responsibility. Now, another thing, a lot of people will mention, and I love to point this scripture out, and those of you who get offended a little easy, you may want to tune out right now for a second because I'm getting ready to say something that's a bit controversial. John 2:15 through 16, when Jesus Christ went into the temple, and when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overthrew the tables, and said unto them that sold doves, take these things hence, make not my father's house a house of merchandise. Now we all know the scripture about beating your swords into plowshares. We all know that Jesus said, turn the other cheek. So clearly and obviously, that is what you need to do, and that needs to be your goal. But that doesn't mean that you need to be a sheep and that you need to just roll over and take it. Jesus, not only did he get angry and vengeful at his father's house being abused and being made into a house of merchandise, he took the time to walk away from the temple, make a scourge of small cords, contemplate upon what he was going to do, premeditation, think about it, formulate a plan, formulate that righteous and rightful indignation against the evil that was being perpetrated against his father's house, and then come back and enact that contemplated plan that he had come up with. So I want to be abundantly clear that it is absolutely your fault, and it is your biblical imperative and your biblical directive to be sure. Definitely no sheep here, brother. That's for sure. Gun loving grandpa. No sheep. It is your biblical imperative to protect the flock around you at every level that you are capable of protecting them. So let's talk about some of those levels. We talked about the physical, actual threats of physical violence or threats of deadly force. We talked a little bit about the information security aspect, and we're going to get a little bit more into that. But there's often a lot of times that you don't think about all the different things that your church needs to prepare for by developing SOPs, developing plans, getting your security team training, and so on and so forth. Things like, well, what are you going to do if it's a natural disaster? What are you going to do if financial predators come into the congregation and goodwill predators? And what I mean by those two things are, we've all seen it one too many times, where you'll have that one helpless parent, that helpless single mom who just needs a little financial help, and then just a little more financial help, and then just a little more financial help. And it ends up that they're bricks basically preying on the goodwill of your congregation. Or do you have, SOPs in place and machinations to be able to identify that that's happening, and then more importantly, what to do about it afterwards? Goodwill predators of subversion can be, and again, many of us have been through this. Many of us. Thank you, Midnight. I appreciate that. That's right. Use this information for good if you can. Many of us have seen the whole, churches have a problem, and then they end up, splitting into multiple different congregations because they had a problem with this member or that member or this rule or that rule. Well, the reality of it is that can actually go even further. You can have people who are actively pursuing goodwill predation and goodwill subversion of your congregation or your religion at large. Naturally, just protecting yourself, your congregation, and the financial affairs of all of your team, your parishioners from lawsuits. Negative media exposure. None of us want to be that church that gets on the news for, twiddling kids, or for, sexual predators were allowed inside the congregation and we weren't aware of it and didn't do anything about it. Arson or fire. Just your standard garden variety criminals who are out there in the parking lot trying to steal stuff or trying to actually take advantage. Hackers, war driving. A hacker doesn't always have to be physically inside your building, although social engineering is one of the most uh, effective and efficient ways to do hacking. And one of the actual owning the box by being physically inside of your facility and having physical contact to your equipment is obviously the most efficient way, but it's not the only way. A hacker can get in from the other side of the world. Obviously, there's identifying abuse of family members, children inside your congregation, and the elderly. And then more importantly, what do I do if I think I'm seeing it? So it's not just so simple to say, "Hey, listen, you see something, say something." Well, that's true. It's very, very true. But if you don't have those exact, clearly outlined procedures and those clearly outlined policies to say, if you witness one, two, and three things, then escalate to X, then escalate to X. If you don't have those policies in place to protect you, then you're opening yourself up to huge amounts of legal disaster and financial disaster. Obviously, there's drug addicts, including your legal prescription users, physical and theological terrorists, and then of course there is the active shooter scenario. That is always an unfortunate, inevitable possibility in this day and age. It's sad, but it is what it is. And do you have plans in place for every single one of these things we just talked about? And have you practiced them with your security team, with your board of deacons? Have you discussed them at length and discussed them on a regular basis and make sure that the policies are up to date? And have you practiced some of them, such as the natural disaster drills and the terrorist drills and the active shooter drills? Have you actually practiced them with the congregation in a calm, orderly, and distinctly outlined fashion? Letting them know ahead of time what to expect, showing it up on your PowerPoint presentation in front of the church, and so on. Well, if you haven't done all this stuff, it is time to prepare. The time is actually well past. So, first and foremost, you need to do a risk analysis and a risk matrix. So, what do I mean by that? Well, my particular congregation, and I attend two congregations virtually. So, my congregation, unfortunately, is Facebook at the moment, but I attend two congregations here in my local area virtually and physically from time to time to two different congregations. Both of them are in a foothills area of the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. I have never seen an earthquake here. So the risk analysis and risk matrix concept of what's the likelihood of something occurring on one axis and what's the impact if it did occur on another axis. And actually, I've got them backwards. I think x-axis is what's the likelihood of it occurring and what's the negative impact if it did. And then you put a dot, 1 through 5 on the bottom, 1 through 5 on the top. And you put a little dot, one for earthquake, one for tornado, one for active shooter, and so on and so on and so on. And then that gives you a risk analysis and a risk matrix to start from. Then you would also have an impact analysis and an impact matrix to be able to decide, okay, well, so for example, an active shooter, the reality of it is very low chance that you would have that happen. But the impact, though, if you did, is huge. And so you would still put a policy and a plan and a mitigation SOP in place for that. You'd also put one in place for the things like an earthquake in my area, though it's very unlikely that it's going to occur. If it did, here's the plan. That wouldn't be the one that you would focus on. I like that. I'd be on that axis, unfortunately. You are one, sir. I'm just saying. Um, Now, in order to deal with those things, not only do you have to do the analysis, do the SOPs, all that kind of stuff, you then have to put in place a team infrastructure that deals with that specific point. So, for example, if you talk about an active shooter, that's where you would talk about your off-duty law enforcement, your security team, both overt and covert. If you have, a hurricane response team, or I'm sorry, an earthquake response team, that would be more where your EMTs, your firemen, those kinds of things would be on that particular team. And you would again stand up an infrastructure for each individual risk and impact that you identify ahead of time by setting down with your council of elders or your council of deacons and the elder members of your church to lay this out. Now, when you're implementing this, don't just grab the first guy because he's a fireman or because he's a law enforcement off duty. you still need to go through the interview and implementation process. And we're going to talk about that again when we get to the end. There's going to be a book we're going to talk about when we get to the end of this. So don't panic about some of the stuff I'm telling you. I'm going to give you a steps 1 through 50 book that actually tells you exactly how to do these things for yourself at your congregation. But my point is, don't just assume that because somebody's a fireman that they're going to know exactly what to do in the case of an arson incident at your church. That's not necessarily the case. They could be a brand new volunteer fireman or one who just doesn't do a good job. So you need to do your interviews and you need to do full-blown implementation. For each individual identified risk that you have decided warrants a team, training, infrastructure, and merit, then you're going to create an SOP literally in writing, because not only is this the SOP that you're going to be using for your team as you're doing training or testing or running scenarios, but this is also a legally binding document. If something ever did, God forbid, occur in any one of those things you had an SOP for, that is a binding document that can be held accountable in a court of law. When someone says, hey, did you have a plan in place for this? No. Well, then that's negligence and we're going to hold you legally liable and we're going to sue you. Or did you have the SOP in place and was it followed? Was it practiced? Were they trained? Did you have the team in place to do so? So it's a good idea to get somebody to go through a legal review once you get the SOPs 100% created, identified, created, and reviewed. Get a lawyer review it. Also, be sure you develop local partnerships, right? So we just talked about, the fireman scenario and the Leo in scenario and medical scenarios. What's wrong with getting a partnership going, like maybe where you're doing an occasional bake sale or a fundraising event for your local volunteer fire department and getting those actively participating and coming in? What's wrong with reaching out to your local law enforcement agency and saying, hey guys, listen, if you need somewhere to practice your CQB tactics or your room clearing tactics, come to my church next week. Don't bring your guns, or bring your guns, but bring them unloaded, please. But yeah, listen, come clear the church. Come practice at my church because we ain't got nobody here Saturday. Please come do that. Because all you're doing is providing that basis for them to be able to work from and those file folders and knowledge for them to be able to work from if they ever do have to respond to your site for an event of some kind. Just imagine if you had a local law enforcement SWAT team or special response team had come through your church 10, 15 times over the past 2 or 3 years using your church to practice their room clearing techniques and their CQB movement and team tactics techniques. How awesome are they going to be if they have to come in and save you guys in the event that something does go down, like a hostage situation? Develop those local partnerships, guys. Seriously. Always provide team training. And now, team training doesn't have to necessarily be it doesn't necessarily have to be all inclusive. So you wouldn't necessarily want the fire arson team or whatever training with the physical security team. You might, if they have some crossover, but make it specific and make sure that you do train on a regular basis. That needs to be part of your SOP. And we're going to talk about some ways that you can do training for free and ways that you can make this cheap. Congregational communication is key. Be sure that you're driving out everything. Complete and utter transparency is of the utmost importance. If you're going to be doing these things for your congregation, you need to bring them along for the ride. You need to get their buy-in. You need to get their feedback. You need to make sure that they understand that this is for them and what it is that you're doing and why. If you don't, then, like, for example, if part of your SOP is if an active shooter event occurs, we want everybody initially to get down below the pews. And here's why, because we're going to have X people posted here and here. They need line of sight. We want you to get low, at least utilizing the pews as some level of bullet stoppage, although they're not going to stop anything. And then we want you to start crawling out towards the aisles, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, if you haven't communicated this and went through training with your congregation, they're not going to understand the why, and they're certainly not going to know how to respond when the time that those events actually occur, which leads to practice and scenario-based drills. Obviously, if you develop the SOPs, you need to pretend you have scenarios, talk your congregation through when these are going to occur, what it's going to be, even something as simple as, kid's gone missing, what to do for lockdown church, what to do for letting people in and out of the building, find that and look at pick up tokens. Test, 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 test. All right, I'm back on. Can everyone hear me now? Buck, you were midnight one. Give me a thumbs up or a heads up if you can hear me now. Awesome. Okay. So continuing education. So we talked about team training and continuing education. So just like in service, just like in-service training in any agency of any kind, you want to have that continuing education. You don't want to just train them once and done. Like here's the SOP, here's some drills, and you're good now, right? For the next 5, 10 years, you want to have that continuing education, and you want to continually be reviewing those SOPs for new knowledge, new information, new things, and new ways to help. So just a few ideas, and again, I'm not going to go through all of these SOPs. This is a bunch of word salad here. This is when I'm coming to your congregation and doing a consultation of at your actual church in front of your security team and your deacon board. This is just some things that we talked through, and these are conversation starters and conversation drivers. But I am going to hit on just a couple, just to give you some concepts of the things that you need to think about and that you need to deal with. So let's talk about intersex rules of engagement, for example. So let's say that there's very frequently times that you have a male or female, like a deacon interacting with a female congregation member. Well, you need to have an SOP in place for that. So make sure there's always two. Make sure that if you're in a room, the doors are open. Make sure that there's a window in the doors. Make sure that whatever the SOP is for your particular place of worship, that needs to be followed to the T without fail every single time. Let's talk about disabled congregation members. What is your SOP for getting them in and out? What is your SOP if you don't have the proper physical facilities, outside, as far as a ramp or a lift gate or a lift elevator, those kinds of things? What's your SOP? Because trust me when I tell you, there's no quicker way to get sued or get injuries than to have that. Again, we touched on child abuse or neglect earlier. We touched on that. You know, for starters, there's the identification of child abuse and neglect. And one of the things that I do teach is one of the courses I offer when I'm doing consultative services is the situational awareness for employees. It is a data driven, scientifically backed methodology of identifying via pre-event indicators something and a negative event before it happens. Okay, child abuse is one of those where it's already happened for the most part, but those same indicators that you use from a biometric standpoint, biometric cues, physical actual cues of bruising in ventral versus dorsal bruising on the arms, those types of things are the kinds of signs that you can look for and identify. The way that the child reacts whenever approached by an abusive adult. They hit that limbic system response of freeze, freeze, flight, or fight. They hit those response mechanisms, just kick on involuntarily. And if you know what you're looking for, you can see those kinds of things. And when you're seeing the patterns of 2, 3, 4 of these anomalies, and they add up, then you know that you got to do something. Okay, well, if you've trained your staff, they understand these signs to look for, and you have an SOP in place that, hey, listen, I think I've identified child abuse, or I think I've identified neglect. What do I do now? Right. So you see something, say something. What do I do now? That protects both the child, and it protects you as the congregation member who has identified the potential child abuse or neglect. And then further even up, it protects the congregation legally from any type of malfeasance or neglect. Just a couple examples. Let's talk about outreach. Homeless, drug addicts, battered women, et cetera, et cetera. That is definitely something you need to develop SOPs for and be seriously, seriously serious about. Missionary and international travel. Are you getting your missionaries and your international travels trained in advanced work? Basically, it's the same concept of high threat protection or high value protection. Are you getting them that training in where they're going, what the potential threat patterns are there, how they are expected to act, what is culturally normal and not, who they can and cannot interact with, how they can and cannot interact on the local level, where they're going, what could get them in trouble and get them kidnapped, murdered, raped, whatever. Are you doing those things? Is that part of your SOP as a training before you send them off? Body cams, let's talk about that for a second. You know, if you have an overt security team, not just a covert security team. Covert obviously would be where you got your concealed carriers, your people who aren't wearing security shirts, they aren't necessarily marked up, you can't tell. Overt is your full blown actual, like I'm wearing a security polo, or you may have law enforcement dressed in full law enforcement uniform, or if you're in a large enough church, you may actually have a full blown kitted out security team member. By the way, clearly outline the legal definitions and legal guardrails for that one. But let's say you do have an overt security force. What's your SOP about body cams? You'd be shocked and surprised how many times you can walk up to a negative situation where somebody's coming in, ex-husband who just recently got kicked out, is coming in trying to show his tail. He feels like it's the preacher's fault that the preacher just preached something last week that caused his wife to kick him out. You walk up and you're like, hey, bro, what can I do to help you? What's going on? Click, turn that little camera on. You'd be surprised how quickly people's attitude changes when they realize that they are being audio and visually recorded for legal playback and that it is binding in court. You'd be quite surprised. Um, Bag searches and after action report procedures. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these. I don't think I want to hit all these, but these are just some things that you can pause the video if you want to and take some notes of some of these things you want to go back and talk to your congregation about. And again, a lot of this stuff, though not all of it, is mentioned in the book that we're going to talk about at the end. Um, that'll help you kind of punch through some of this checklist. But these are just conversation starters. Okay. So I can't answer for you for your particular geographical area and your particular congregation and the feel and the attitude and the personality of your congregation as to whether you need covert versus overt. Do you need bag searches? And if so, listen, let me be clear on bag searches. Walt Disney does bag searches. Okay. The happiest place on earth does bag searches. So don't tell me your church can't do it or your congregation won't like it. It's all in that communication to them. It's all in the training to make sure that they're doing it the right way and they're not searching every single bag. You're narrowing and filtering down. It's in how you do it. Point is, all of these are just conversation starters to drive those conversations after you've identified the risk matrix and impact analysis of which SOPs do I need to develop, which ones are actually the most important, and then work your way down to the ones that are not as important. All right, so I know you're all thinking, okay, so oh my God, this is so much information. And how do I do it? It's overwhelming. Do I pay a security director in my church? Do I have that paid security team? Look, just go. Okay, just go. The longer you sit in analysis paralysis and try to decide on what you are or are not going to do with this information, the longer and further away you are from protecting your flock by having these processes and procedures in place to do so. Just go. Just get started. You don't have to throw a ton of money at this. There's things you can do starting this very Sunday that will make your congregation just that much safer. And then the next Sunday, one more thing, and the next Sunday, one more thing. Just get to going. Okay. Identify your subject matter experts or SMEs in any individual area. So we touched on your firemen, your arson experts. We touched on your law enforcement agents. We touched on your EMTs, your paramedics, your doctors, et cetera, et cetera. Identify them, approach them, work with them to establish an initial plan and structure. Just start your recruiting. Now we're going to talk about how for the main team and the dynamics of that. We talked about interviewing and don't just take anybody, right? But initially, just to get going, take what you can get and just start going. Form your committees, hold them accountable. Hey, this is the arson, or I'm sorry, this is the fire evacuation committee, and I'm going to hold you accountable. Within 4 weeks, I want the initial draft of the SOP. Within 2 weeks after that, I want a legal review. Da 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 da. Right after that, then get to drafting your SOPs. Get your legal advice and your legal counsel in place to review those. Assure that you have permits if you're going to do overt security, like we talked about. That the SOPs are very clearly defined, legal reviews, and then your permits are in place for your particular state and municipality, the laws. Engage your local fire, medical, and legal and law enforcement agencies, like we talked about. Share your SOPs with them, right? So there's nothing wrong with once these things have been legally reviewed and they're in final draft form. Nothing wrong with photocopying them and handing them out. Nothing at all. So Midnight asked suggestions on handling bag searches if people are legally carrying, like purse carry. Do you acknowledge the weapon? And as if they have a permit, you definitely wouldn't want to make a big scene. So that's something that I can't answer for your church. What I can tell you is I can give you more questions to add to this to the initial questions. And you wouldn't want to let others know that person is carrying if they don't want them to. So that's exactly right. So that part's exactly right. So obviously, you don't want to advertise that you found a firearm in somebody's pocketbook, but in your particular congregation and in your particular specific situation with the person who you have found that carrying, is that person a force multiplier? Are they actually going to be beneficial to you? Do you know and have you been with them to know, that they know how to handle themselves and what to do? Maybe, maybe not, right? Does your congregation allow open carry versus concealed carry? Is your congregation one of those that, they just don't care? Like, I'm from Texas and I don't care. You carry it up on your chest as far as I care, as long as you ain't touching it and messing with it during the service. So that's not one I can answer for you, unfortunately. That's going to be specific to the situation. And if you're asking about the fact of if you see someone concealed carrying when they don't have a concealed carry permit, instead of open carrying, if you're talking about the fact that you've identified somebody potentially breaking the law, well, again, I can't answer that for you. That's your conscience about see something, say something. But I can say, how do you know they don't have concealed? I mean, how do you know that that person doesn't have a concealed carry? And if you do know that, is that not one of those where you would have already you'd already know the person well enough to know what their mentality was about concealed carry versus open carry, and the laws and constitutional carry and stuff? Or would you not want to have more private conversation with them, initially, at least the first time, to say, hey, you're breaking the law, whatever. Okay. All right. So all the SOPs in the world won't help you if they aren't shared. So train, 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 train some more. Okay. Always train. And again, this doesn't necessarily have to be something you spend a lot of money on. We're going to look at a few resources, like I showed you the books and teased on as we get to the last slide. Regularly drill and practice with your individual teams based specifically and solely on the SOPs, and then regularly train and drill with your congregation. Regularly share the SOP information and drills with the congregation. Regularly review the documents to make sure that they're still annual, whatever it is, whether it's your annual, quarterly, biannually, whatever your attestation is, where you're assuring that everything's in place. Whatever your SOP rotation is, do it. Update it with whatever the newest, latest, and greatest is. Assure staff rotation for spiritual health. You need to require that people be off duty and attending the service. The key to them being at your church is their spiritual health, is getting that spiritual manna and being able to take in that nourishment to carry them through and into the goal, right? You don't want the same guy every single week in and week out, doing your AV. Same guy week in and week out, taking point up by the stage as, overt security. Rotate them out. Force them to take days off. If your church is so small that you can't rotate, come up with something. Think of something. Obviously, incentivize your volunteer staff. Nothing in life, guys, is truly free. Now, yes, they're going to be giving you free services, and I get that. Most congregations operate off of volunteer, and then you have volunteers that are force multipliers, right? So if you've got, you know, grandma over here who's too old to actually be on the physical security, but she's on the call list, on the text list or whatever. And if she sees something, she's texting y'all. She's a force multiplier. But you got to incentivize the volunteer staff to keep them coming back and keep them engaged. All right, so where to start, right? So we've talked about some of the SOPs. We've talked about risk analysis, risk matrix, impact analysis, and impact matrix. So where to start on some of your training? So obviously, I offer some training courses, and I'm going to kind of punch through some of this and get to some stuff that you can do without me, because since this is YouTube, it's very possible that you're watching me from somewhere besides northwestern North Carolina and within a reasonable driving radius. But Mining Ridge Armory does offer consultative services comprehensively. So I'll come to your church, do a free consultation service with you, go through this PowerPoint, go through driving conversations and conversation starters, and kind of outline, a reasonable plan moving forward for what your church needs to do. And then we can do things like the situational awareness for employees training. That applies to pretty much everybody, teaching everybody, again, that scientifically backed, data driven approach to being able to identify threat or identify an event before it happens. That translates to almost every realm. Um, yeah, granny with a shotty. That's my granny. My granny totally would be a shotgun granny. Um, the Refuse to be a Victim course that I offer. That's another course that, like we mentioned, is non-firearms related. It's a course that goes over comprehensively physical security for your home, for your congregation, concepts of scam artists, internet security, elder scams, child security, so on and so forth. Refuse to be a Victim is an amazing program. That's kind of a broad umbrella approach, broad stroke, brush stroke approach to general topics of security. Obviously, we offer information security consultative services, how to, anything from hardening your infrastructure and network to, just individual or individual hands-on services for your equipment, making sure that, hardening each individual device, making sure patching's up to date, making sure that you've got the proper levels of software, proper types of software for what you're using it for, proper operating system, IP address, MAC filtering, whatever the case may be. Um, any technology consultative services. So if you need to talk to me or talk to somebody about, what radios to use or what cameras to use for your CCTV or IP, TV, what door strikes to use, whether to use a magnet lock or a regular lock, whatever. Obviously, I offer the full NRA spectrum of training from an actual hard skills in the firearms realm, as well as advanced training, concealed carry, handgun training, techniques and tactics training, whether it be room clearing, whether it be team tactics, whether it be vehicle tactics, whatever the case may be. I offer more advanced training courses for those congregations and security teams that actually need it. And of course, I am an FFL and can actually get you the equipment once you decide on what equipment to buy. Now, let's say you're not within driving distance of me. I don't want that to stop you from doing what's right for your congregation. I want you to always be moving forward and doing whatever it is to be able to protect your congregation members that you can. So this next slide, I'm going to give you some resources and some good places to start that don't benefit me at all. Quite the opposite. They actually detract from me a little bit because they some of the training I just talked about, although you can never replace in-person training, some of it can be replaced or at least done online or in the form of books or those kinds of things. So a couple things are InfraGard. So the United States infrastructure, our churches are now considered part of the United States infrastructure. So you can actually register your particular congregation with InfraGard. You can set up with their training portal and go and take their training for free as part of the United States infrastructure. Okay, that's infragard.org. Lots of amazingly good training there, by the way. The Department of Homeland Defense, very similarly, offers a ton of free training, both online as well as instructor led. Anything from physical self defense, as you can see from this, to terrorist response to terrorist chemical and chemical attacks, those kinds of things. They offer a lot of amazing training for free. The book Defending the Flock: A Security Guide for Church Security Directors, okay, by Chris P. Maloney. Now, I'm going to tell you something. This book, I'm going to spend a second on this one. I'm going to back up here and take a swallow because I'm going to spend a second. This book is incredible. This guy has done an amazing job, and whoever he is out there, thank you, sir, for your service both to the military and to our religious organizations here in America and worldwide. This book breaks down, not only does it break down some of the things we just talked about, okay, it talks about how to actually build out the teams, right? Literally structure, that director and on down structure, how to interview for the teams, rough outlines of just like a general attacks and fire response plans and how to work with your and he actually has a section there about risk matrix and analysis on security assessment. So he actually goes through some of that too. Emergency and hazard training basics, addressing financial attacks and threats to your church, child and vulnerable adult protection, arson and fire threats. And he goes through it in such a way that it outlines exactly what you need to do in order to develop your SOP, then how to train your team members, including training aids on when you're having the classes with your teams, some of the things and some of the questions you're going to ask. And then in the appendix back in the back, He takes it one level further. He even gives you actual logs and templates for after action reports and applications for employment on your security teams, security reviews and interview um, forms and policy templates and, oh my God, safety team applications, individual incident reports, follow-up reports, patrol logs, safe access logs, suspected child maltreatment report, and so on and so forth. He gives you the templates and he literally just outlines this for you. This book costs like 16 bucks, guys. It's like 16, 17 bucks. You can get it used on Amazon as a used book. This one. If you don't take anything away from this webinar I've given you tonight, go buy this guy's book. Okay, go buy this guy's book. And in answer to your question there, Buck, for the right amount of money on the other side of the world, if I have to, like literally the exact opposite side of the world, bro, for the right amount of money. But all joking aside, I do like to keep it within, say, 10 hours drive. I don't know how many miles that is, but I prefer to keep it to 8, 10 hours drive. And for something like that, I would like to make sure that at least I have enough of an engagement to make it worth the trip, because, got to cover hotel costs, food, gas, and so on and so forth. But I have no problem driving 8, even 12 hours, really. I've gone to Florida, 12 hours away and done some work down there. Okay. So again, you don't remember nothing else from tonight. Remember this one. Book Left of Bang: How the Marine Corps Combat Hunter Program Can Save Your Life by Patrick Van Horn. So the Marines Combat Hunter, just real quick in a nutshell, is the basis of the situational awareness for employees training, although it focuses more on the Marines from a true combat hunter. How do I hunt down and kill the bad guys, right? But it still goes through that data-driven, scientifically backed methodology that I use in the situational awareness training. And it shows you how to identify iconography, how to identify atmospherics, proxemics, biometrics, and to identify those pre-indicators. Yep, you got it. But so midnight nailed it though. And the snacks. Yeah, listen, I'm all about some snacks. Probably shows. That's a good book. And again, you can get that Left to Bang book used, 16 to 20 bucks. All right. The Gift of Fear, the book, The Gift of Fear and Other Survival Signals That Protect Us from Violence by Gavin de Becker. Okay. This one I got used. Now, a couple things I do want to mention real quick. So I suggest very, very, very strongly you get this one. This one, you buy it. Just buy it. Use, new, whatever. Buy it. Buy the book. But the Left to Bang book and The Gift of Fear and Other Survival Signals, Amazon, I'm sorry, Audible is your friend. Audible is your friend. So if you've never had a subscription to Audible, you can get a 1 or 2 month free subscription to Audible, which is audiobooks where they read the book, and you'll get like 2, 3, 4 books for free when you very first sign up. The book Left of Bang and the book The Gift of Fear and Other Survival Signals That Protect Us from Violence are on Audible. So you can actually get both of those books for free as an audiobook if you don't have an initial Audible subscription. And you can cancel after like like 30 days or something like that. Okay. Now this one, the book, The Gift of Fear and Other Survival Signals, talks about that little voice inside your head and what that means and why it's there, and how you should actually listen to it. I mean, your brain is processing stuff in nanoseconds that you have no idea it's processing. I mean, you don't know, you got that funny gut feeling that you need to roll your window up and lock your doors, but you don't know why. Well, you don't know that your peripheral vision didn't catch something that your brain immediately processed in your side view mirror over there and told you, lock your doors, roll your window up. You don't know that, but listen to that voice. Okay. Now, Zello. Look up Zello and a how to on YouTube. Okay. Zello, if you can't afford to get proper radio communications for your security team, that's fine. There are tons of how to videos out on YouTube for how to use Zello. Zello effectively is a push to talk application that you can create groups for, password protected groups. You can record the conversations, for legal retention, legal information. It's just a great and amazing asset to be able to use for intra-team communication. And it's free. I mean, it's literally free. Now, it does use, a little bit of battery power on your phone. It will operate on both, Wi-Fi and cellular. You can be literally on the other side of the world on a missionary trip and still be engaged with your security team back over in the United States, okay, using Zello. Zello is an amazing application. And again, it's free. Byron Rogers at the Bravo Research Group executive protection podcast. So this particular episode, number 15, Church Security Podcast, this guy does, he owns a Bravo Research Group. He owns an executive protection and close protection, high value, high net worth protection agency. And he particularly works for some really, really large mega church somewhere. I don't know. Don't know, don't care. It's none of my business. But this particular episode, this one security podcast, it's about 2 hours and 11 minutes. And I promise you, it will not be a waste of your life. He goes over with the main director of security for that megachurch, a lot of the concepts that we talked through tonight, and then a bunch more stuff that I am nowhere near as good as him at talking about. But this is a great and amazing training tool for you and for your congregation security team. About 2 hours and 11 minutes of your life, well spent. The Los Angeles County surviving an active shooter. Okay. Now, we've all seen the run, hide, fight videos, and now that's fine. But the standard run, hide, fight one's like 4 or 5 minutes or something, and it is subpar at best. Okay. It is subpar at best. And the reason is because it doesn't deal with the mitigation techniques for what to do after the event is over with regards to police and police engagement. It doesn't go over communication between you and law enforcement, like if you've locked down the door, how to lock down the door for starters. But if you've locked down the door and you've got your kids locked in behind that door, how then to communicate and what signs that the law enforcement is going to be looking for as they walk up to the door. This particular one from the LA County Sheriff's Department goes over it extensively and is absolutely worth its weight in gold for 9 minutes of your life. Now, again, I'm not necessarily endorsing, run, hide, fight as a methodology for self-defense and for your security team, but understanding that you're planning for the least common denominator of congregation member who may or may not be comfortable with firearms or may not be proficient. This is good information for them. And again, 9 minutes of solid gold. Okay. Warrior Poets Society's last but not least, this is the last one I'm going to show you. All right. Now, Warrior Poet Society is a deeply religious individual. Most of you have seen his videos on YouTube. This particular church security series that he does is not on YouTube. There's only one video of these that's on YouTube. You have to go to his website. And the reason is because he deals with a lot of information that may not necessarily be suitable for YouTube. Now, a couple things I want you to be aware of. For starters, it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to watch all these videos all the way through. I want to make you be aware that he is a special forces, ex-special forces. So he approaches most all of his content from a very hardcore militaristic view in a lot of cases. That's fine. Take that particular portion of it with a grain of salt and adapt it for your congregation and your congregational needs. But, warriorpoetsociety.us/church-security, and you can watch those videos. Again, 45 minutes of your life well spent, 45 or an hour, something like that. All right. Now, we're going to start sweeping doors and cleaning up the floors. So for starters, yep, if I head out y'all's way at some point in time, definitely got to bring the Titan with me. Buck is referencing a DSP Armory Titan in 308 that I am currently trying to put together for review for a company called gear-report.com or gear-report.com that I do review work for. By the way, if you go to miningridgearmory.com, which we have pictured on the screen right here, if you go to my website, you'll see hyperlinks to all of the different sources of content. You'll see hyperlinks to my Gear Report page. You'll see hyperlinks to my Facebook page. You'll see hyperlinks to this YouTube channel that you just spent, an hour, hopefully not wasted of your life watching, and so on and so forth. My LinkedIn page and et cetera. So all of my media, as well as listings of my classes, calendars for when those classes are offered, and methods for being able to contact me directly. So all that said, we've gone about an hour and 6 minutes, which is pretty good for me. So hour and 8 minutes is what StreamYard's telling me. I'm going to sweep the floors and close the doors. But before I go, is there any questions anyone has or anything anyone would like to know before I go? Giving out rifles. I wish I were, brother. I wish I were. Wish I had a bunch to give out. I've actually, oddly enough, with this COVID-19 rush on firearm sales, I've actually sold out almost everything in my inventory, and met a bunch of really cool people too. It's amazing how people when they're truly wanting knowledge is the kind of people I love to have. So like all of you guys who join my webinars and stuff and who truly, truly, truly want the knowledge, that's what keeps me going. It really does. So if there's no questions, thank you all so much for joining tonight. Hopefully this information has been helpful to you. Please subscribe, like, share, ring the bell, all that good social media hubbub to keep me to where I can continue to produce this. That is awesome. That is awesome. That is cool dad time. That is very, very, very cool dad time. Get to teach him the three always, always keep your finger off trigger, and that's all good. Midnight, you are very, very welcome. I'm glad you enjoy my chats. Keep up the good work with your kids, by the way. I'm glad you learned a lot. Appreciate that, Buck. Thank you. Hopefully, I'll do a few more over the coming weeks, continuing valuable content and topics for those of you who are out there who are watching this in replay. Uh, he's also referencing the 3 or 4 videos I've done the past couple of weeks. Again, focusing specifically on high threat protection, agents, information technology, as well as some new shooter web seminars and content like that. If you haven't, please feel free to jump out on my YouTube channel and check those out. Again, thank you all very much for coming tonight. For those of you out in YouTube land, until we see you out on the range, you keep living your dream.